Some speakers are introduced as this speaker needs no introduction. And Travis is in that category for certainly almost everybody that follows this subject. Many of you saw the Hollywood film that was made years ago about his experience. Some of you were in the room last night when we screened Jennifer Stein's outstanding documentary. And for me, there are very few people in the field who have stood as tall as him, who have been spokespeople for that this is a real thing that happens to real people. My favorite introduction that I ever heard him give was to the effect of, he's brought up, he looks in the audience, and he says, if what I'm about to tell you happened to me, what I'm about to tell you, if you were up here and you were telling me it happened to you, I would probably think you were crazy or a liar. So if you're feeling a little like that about me right now, that's fine, and let me begin my talk. Ladies and gentlemen, Travis Walton. And I think we need a mic on you. You ready? Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, how many people saw the Travis film? Quite a few of you. The reason I'm asking is because I don't want to go over the same ground that you've already heard. You know, there's so many different variations on the talk I give because there's so much material to cover that I could make it 4 distinct talks without covering the same material. So, but I do want to go ahead and for the people who didn't see the film, and just recap the incident itself. A lot of people, to begin with, imagine Arizona as being all desert, and we have the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world there. So the place where we were working was up on the Mogollon Rim, which is the highest point above 7,000 feet for anywhere around there. And from there you can see all the way to Flagstaff and the mountain there by Flagstaff is the highest point in the state of Arizona. And that's snow-capped quite a bit of the year. This is just a general lay of the map for people who are curious about how to get into that particular area. It was about a good hour, from the time we left our homes to out there to the job, which was contracted from the United States Forest Service. It was timber stand improvement, actually not logging technically. They called us loggers for want of a term that would be recognizable to the general public. But it was timber stand improvement, thinning actually. The loggers had been through that same terrain the previous year, and our job was to go in and remove the trees that the loggers had damaged and clean up. And that day that we were working, we were doing fuel reduction, which was to take all of the material in strips through the larger contract and cut up everything and cut it and pile it up so that it could be burned at a time of low fire danger, which would remove all of the burnable material in strips. It was kind of a firefighting sort of approach. All of us fit into one truck because it was a double cab truck. I jumped right through it. Anyway, we finished up a long day's work, and it was starting to get dark. We were trying to, push because, you know, it's November and snow would be flying not too long from then, and the weather would keep us out of the woods. So we'd loaded up our equipment and we're headed out. Now in the movie it makes it look like we've been riding for quite some time and gotten drowsy, you know, but there was no sleepiness to it. You know, we had just been barely just minutes before engaged in hard physical labor, so everybody was just totally pumped and wide awake and kind of talking rapidly and everything as we're going down the road. So seeing these little glimmers of light through the trees, it wasn't like immediately alarming, like, oh my God, what is that? You know, it was just like, oh, I wonder what that could be. Because normally in the woods at night, you just don't see anything except, you know, if you're coming upon a cabin or something like that, and there wasn't supposed to be anything there. But these little glimmers of light made me think immediately about maybe deer hunters, because we'd heard some shots during the day here and there, and it was deer hunting season at that time. So I thought maybe campers, you know, deer hunters camped up there. But it just wasn't adding up, you know. You could estimate where the curve of even though the woods were really thick and the trees were thick and you couldn't see, you could tell the source of this light was higher than where ground level would be. And it wasn't like anything that we immediately called each other's attention to, but not even sure who actually saw it first, because it was just kind of like, kind of a low interest at first, a passing glance. But then we started saying, what could that be, you know? And we're trying to think of things that might be, you know. Could it be the moon? Well, no, here's the moon, clear as a bell right over here. You know, could it be, you know, sunset? No, it's a little too late for a sunset. We had at various times fought forest fire, and the Mogollon Rim area there got the highest number of lightning strikes of any place in the whole continental United States, except for the Everglades. So up along the Rim Road there, I can go back and show you that map again. The Rim Road goes right along the edge of that high drop-off there. And you can, any place you walk along that road, you're within sight of a tree that's been hit by lightning. It's that common. And there was a time where, on the way to work, we saw where the previous night there had been a lightning strike and the tree was on fire up there, you know. So that was where the whole idea for the name of the movie, Fire in the Sky, could this be a fire? Could there have been lightning strike up there? But it had just been a little too dry in terms of weather for it to be a lightning strike. So none of this was adding up. I could see a place ahead where there was a break in the trees and the light was shining across the road. And so I said, Mike, hurry up, get up there so we can see what it is. Because by then everybody was saying, what could that be? And it was, as soon as we broke into that band of light, there it was, unmistakable. We knew what it was. Everybody in the whole truck knew what it was. It was like from here to the back of the room. It was just right there. Alan Dallas was in the back. He yelled out, it's a flying saucer, it's a spaceship, right off the bat. But not that anybody needed to say it. But my immediate reaction was this was this was a fleeting glance. We were going to see something and it would be gone in a flash. Quite often when we're going through the woods and you catch sight of some wild animal, by the time you catch the rest of the guy's attention and they look where you're pointing, it's gone. You know, they're lucky if they see it at all. And so that was kind of my thinking, that this thing would just be gone in a flash. I thought it would take off. As Mike stopped the truck, I threw open the door and just jumped out and started moving quickly towards it. And then within just a couple of strides, I could tell it wasn't taking off. And so I immediately started slowing down. But the crew was still pretty alarmed by what I was doing, you know, to get out at all. It kind of surprised me too, really, but I didn't want to show my misgivings, but I kept going towards it, and I got to, you know, to about this point of view right here, where I was looking up at about a 45-degree angle, and by then those guys were pretty worked up about, come on, get back in the truck, let's get out of here. You know, they were getting pretty scared. They said they could, that it seemed like something was about to happen. That's the phrase that was used, you know. They said they could feel, and I felt it too. It was kind of like, you know, the reason the hair standing up on the back of my neck is more than just fear. I think there was some kind of a charge building up in the air that we could all feel. And when I got up and was looking at it like this, it was metallic. Parts of it were glowing, and the parts that weren't glowing, of course, were darker by comparison, but you could still see reflections of the trees and the surroundings in it. It wasn't so bright that you couldn't look into it. Like, you can look right into this light here, even though it's giving off light. If you've ever, like, watched television with the window open, where you can see a reflection of the window on the screen at the same time you can see what's on TV. It was kind of like seeing two sources of light at the same time. But I was looking up at it like that, and those guys were getting pretty anxious and, you know, start swearing at me to get back in the truck. And I was, you know, thinking that that's what I was going to do right away. But suddenly the sound it was making got louder. It was a strange mixture of tones, high and low, off the range of human hearing on both the high end and the low end. And but it was moving and got louder at the same time, and it was just kind of a reflex that I jumped for cover. There was a pile of logging debris in the middle of the clearing. That's where we would generally pile the stuff for burning later, to make sure it was as far from any tree as possible, because, you know, the heat from the fire can damage any surrounding trees, even though they do it when there's snow on the ground and that kind of stuff. But there was a log sticking out of the pile, and I got down behind that log, but the jumping for cover like that moved me down and forward and into a crouch. And so when I decided to get up and run back to the truck, I stood up. And it was at that moment that brought my head closest to the craft. And I think that's what caused this discharge from the craft. It was something that the crew described. One of the police reports, the sheriff's report, described it as looking like a long blue flame. This deputy had interviewed one of the crewmen. Some of them described it as looking like a beam, or they actually compared it to like I'd stepped on a landmine, like an explosion, a grenade, you know. But the force of this threw me through the air. I immediately went unconscious. I felt this numbing shock. If you've ever been blindsided and hit when you didn't see it coming, that was all I knew, and I was unconscious. But you know, some of them said it threw me 10 feet, some said 20 feet. But they described it as that I was limp, that I was without any defenses, that I dropped like a rag doll, you know, that immediately it wasn't, oh goodness, could he be hurt? I mean, they were instantly certain they'd killed me. And that's what they said. They were saying to each other, he's dead, he's dead. And I emphasize that because I'd talk about this, and at that point, people would remark, "Oh, what a bunch of cowards! What a bunch of heroes! You know, run off and leave your friend like that." You know, but at that point, Mike's responsibility was the safety of the remaining crew members, and it wouldn't be wise to get anybody else hurt trying to rescue somebody they think is already dead. So they took off thinking they were next. I don't hold anything against them, even though, and this kind of came up in the movie, there was feelings that surfaced about them assuming that I in some way blamed them. Some of my family members in the ensuing days were, reproachful towards the crew about having left at that point. I have no problem with what they did. They did what they had to do. They said they took off, nearly wrecking the truck, just trying to get out of there as fast as they could, any way they could. They said they stopped when they, could see that they weren't being pursued, and argued about what to do, and then caught sight of deer hunters passing by on the next road, and decided to go try to catch them, thinking even at that point they felt the obligation to go back and check to see if they could help me, but they wanted to get some deer hunters with rifles before they would attempt to do that. I doubt that guns would be that much of an equalizer, but that was what their thinking was at the time. So they took off, tried to catch the deer hunters. They were unable to catch them. And when Mike pulled over and said, "Look, guys, we got to go back, we got to at least check," they didn't want to go. A lot of the crew members said, no, let's just keep going. Let's go get some help first. When Mike said, anybody that doesn't want to go can wait here for us and we'll come back and get you later, nobody volunteered to stand alone in the dark and wait for the truck to come back, which is the storyline that they put in the movie, so that for some reason Mike could go back by himself, and then you could wonder about the murder theory more, But so they all went back. Nobody was going to get out. No way, no how. So they went back, and they were arguing, they said, about whether I was in one piece, whether this blast of energy had blown me to bits. Kitty said that even though they saw it leaving as they approached the area, his greatest fear was, what was my body going to look like? But when they got to where they could see the truck had really spun out in the road when they took off, and Mike said he found footprints going towards the clearing. They said they yelled and called and made a search, and even though Mike had been pretty strong up to that point, he broke down at that point, and they finally decided that they would go back to town and try to get some help. When they got back to town, Kenny was the one that made the phone call, called the local sheriff's deputy, who came down and then called the sheriff, and his second in command came down. So you had at least 3 lawmen there interviewing these guys, and they all said that they thought the crew looked, like something terrible had happened, but they immediately became suspicious that this was some kind of a wild cover story for some kind of a fight, that they had harmed me and hidden my body, and that they'd come up with a crazy cover story, which, them trying to explain it away, I can see why they would think that, but I think that would be kind of a dumb cover story if they had murdered me. It'd be so much easier to say he walked out of sight and we never saw him again. Things like that happen in the woods all the time. You got bears and mountain lions up there, and who knows what could happen. Rattlesnakes. But unlike in the movie, they did go back and do a cursory search that night. Half the crew did. The other half went to back to town. I guess I'm not clear on the details, but I guess Mike went with one of the deputies to notify my mother. But there was an immediate search, over 50 men on horseback, four-wheel drive, a lot of people on foot, and a very organized grid search where every searcher was within sight of the next man, and basically crisscrossing the entire area looking for any kind of sign of any sort. They brought in the tracking dogs from the local prison, but this murder theory kept growing. And this is something people would rather believe. They'd rather believe anything than what these guys were saying. So the men heard about this and said, hey, we'll take sodium pentothal, truth serum, lie detector test, anything you want. So they brought in the state police lie detector expert, the top man in the state, and tested the men. And much to the sheriff's surprise, they passed. And so they were really kind of stumped at that point. When I regained consciousness, I was already aboard. I don't have any recollection of how that was accomplished, whether I was, people say I was beamed up or what, for all I know, they could have just got out and picked me up and lifted me and whatever. I don't know how it happened, but when I woke up, I was lying on the table, and I knew I was on some kind of raised surface because the ceiling was so close. There was a light above me, and it was very hard to focus my eyes, but I was in a lot of pain. I was having trouble breathing, and it was not a real clear sort of regaining consciousness. It was real hazy, real vague, in and out of consciousness. It seemed like the pain itself was knocking me back out. But I heard the sounds of movement around me, and then I started to remember, being in the woods and seeing that craft. And then I figured, well, I was getting ready to run away. Maybe I hurt myself somehow. And I felt this feeling of suffocation. This was the service station there in Heber. There's not much point in this slide anymore because they tore this down last year. But, as a landmark, people driving through town would be interested to see the place where they met with the lawmen. There was, just as a little quick aside, there was a guy that came on the internet and he had the whole inside story. He was going to tell everybody the truth. He was claiming to be one of the lawmen's nephew, and it was claiming that the crew had met with the sheriff at the Red Robin Diner. Well, at this point in time, the Red Robin Diner did not exist for another 20 years. But that was just the beginning of the BS. There's so many people that go online and try to become Mr. Know-It-All. And some of the people were wise to that and said, hey, there is no Red Robin Diner there. He goes, oh, I meant the Red Onion Diner, and there is one. But that, too, came 20 years later. But the search widened and intensified. More and more people, more aircraft, more horses, the tracking dogs from the prison. The dogs were only able to find the trail to the middle of the clearing. But by the time I took a test, the president of the American Polygraph Association actually weighed in on this particular case when he said, one test is in the upper 90 percentile, properly conducted. But when you have 6 people passing tests on the same issue, the odds are 1,000,000 to 1 of there being any kind of a mistake. That, just add layer upon layer on the veracity of the test. And that was then. As of now, there's been 16 past tests in connection with this incident, and proving we saw what we saw. What happened, happened. And they didn't murder me. But there was all kinds of people all the way along. This is the state police lie detector expert, top guy in the state. Just a blurry picture. I'm laying there thinking, oh, I must have got hurt. Oh, maybe they took me to the hospital. Maybe I'm in a hospital. I hear the sounds of movement around me, you know. I can feel this thing they've got on my chest. And it hurts, you know. Everything's hurting. So I'm thinking, something's seriously wrong inside. You know, I felt mortally wounded. I felt like I was dying, actually. And so this feeling of suffocation generates a feeling of panic that I keep comparing to waterboarding, because waterboarding is a kind of a interrogation technique that is totally harmless, but is so terrifying that they called it, quote, torture, even though our own guys do it as practice, part of their training. Even the enemy trains for it, but it works anyway because it generates so much fear, this feeling of suffocation. So I'm feeling like I can't get enough air to breathe, and I'm feeling mortally wounded, like something's really wrong inside. And also, as soon as my vision does clear, I see these creatures standing over me, and instantly, you know, I knew I was not in the hospital. And it was just total panic took over, you know, you know, so many people think, oh, I wouldn't be that scared, you know. I'd stay calm and ask good questions and slip a souvenir in my pocket. But it was just the feeling that even as I saw him, I tried to hit at him, but I could hardly move. And the feeling that I can't make my body move, like I'm forcing it to move, and I can't. It was just more of a push than anything when it made contact with the one that was closest to me. And I rolled away, and this thing on my chest fell off, but I staggered because I was so weak, and I was just mainly just focused on them as I backed away, and I just kept backing up until I bumped into something. They were coming towards me, and I just real quickly looked to see what I'd bumped into, and I saw an array of tools or instruments of some kind there, and I just grabbed the biggest thing I could find and started swinging at them in a threatening way. They weren't close enough to actually strike, but I was just screaming, totally hysterical, you know. I was out of control. I mean, just out of my mind with fear, and you know, the amount of fear was the only thing that was giving me enough strength to even stand up. It felt like I was that impaired, and I was figuring how to get away from them. The only door I could see was on the other side of them. I was thinking of fighting my way past them, but before I could, they abruptly turned and went out the door. But that moment there where they were staring at me was excruciating in a peculiar way. It seemed like they were looking into me, not just at me, in a real disturbing kind of it was excruciating. There was this squirmy sort of feeling in my head. And it took me quite a while to figure out what I think was happening there. After I was returned, one of the medical tests was an EEG, and it was done without the technician knowing who I was or what had happened. So when he detected an unusual pattern in the brainwave scan, that's, you know, something that he came to on his own without being influenced by knowing who I was. And So the plan is to, compare that to what might be caused by being hit by lightning or being electrocuted or something like that. But the stare was really excruciating. One of my talks, a medical doctor came up and said, well, the largest opening in the front of the skull is the eyes, and in a very large-eyed creature like this, that would be even larger. And if there was some sort of a telepathic force coming from their brains, they could have been joining forces, combining the effort to get me under control. Because I was out of control, and as weak as I was, still a physical threat to them. They rely very heavily on being able to keep people subdued without any physical restraints. But it was also, if I was in a mortally wounded state, life-threatening to me. I was, without knowing it, postponing what was probably actually a medical intervention. At the time that this happened, I accepted the term abduction and just looked upon this as some kind of a very outrageous sort of invasive, some sort of experiment on me or something. But, in hindsight, I think they were trying to correct the damage that was done as a result of me getting unexpectedly close. But when they were unable to restrain me, they abruptly left and went out and went down this little passageway to the right. And in my panic, I almost immediately wanted to find a way out. And so I went in the other direction. They'd gone to the right, I went to the left. It was very cramped and a very, very claustrophobic sort of feeling to not be able to get enough air, struggling to breathe. And in this dimly lit passageway, it curved so tightly back to the right that I couldn't see very far ahead. And also I couldn't see very far behind to see if they were pursuing me. So I was kind of, torn in my panic to whether it was scarier in front and scarier in back. But I came to a room that I could see door outlines on the opposite side. And upon entering the room and proceeding towards where the doors were, I couldn't find any way to open them, No doorknob, no button, nothing of that sort. And that was just the one driving thought that I had, is to get out of there somehow. I guess in the back of my mind I was thinking if I could open the door, I could just drop 10 or 15 feet to the ground and be back in the woods. It's probably not where it was at the time, but that was the disorganized thinking my panic was leading me to. That stare that was so uncomfortable was also the focal point of my nightmares in the weeks after the incident. This layout is something that I pieced together later, based on everything that happened. But at the time, thinking that this round room that was actually in the center of the craft would have doorways that would lead to the outside was definitely not the case. But I discovered that when from a position near the center of the room, you would see points of light on a darkened surface, much like stars, a star pattern. Some of these controls seemed to do nothing. None of them would open any doors, but there was some controls that moved the star pattern in a very disorienting way, because this was, these points of light were totally surrounding me. In hindsight, it makes me wonder what would they need with a view of the stars. Certainly they're not navigating by that, except maybe in a close quarter situation where they might be trying to move into inside of a building or hangar or larger ship or something like that. And it's, you know, the fact that you see stars out there could just be incidental. But for whatever reason, this may have triggered an intervention. There was either a sound or a change in the light from the door that I'd entered this room, and I looked up to see what I took to be a human being at that point. I thought it was somebody there intervening to take me away from these horrible creatures. And I viewed this as with a lot of relief. When I ran up to him and started, you know, yelling and babbling all these questions, he didn't really respond. At first, I did not find that too alarming because I thought maybe it was because of the helmet, that he couldn't talk with it on or maybe couldn't hear with it on. So when he wanted me to go with him, I went with him. If he's going to take me out of there, I'm all for it. And then out through what I took to be some kind of an airlock, and it was so much brighter out. It just hurt to, you know, the light was so much brighter by comparison, and it seemed to be sort of like in sunlight and color, and a lot brighter. But it was hard for me, you know, being in a weakened condition like that, to do much more than focus on not falling down. He seemed to be in quite a bit of hurry, pulling me along, and but there was other craft inside of this area at this point. Now, whether the craft was there the whole time or how long it had been in there, I don't know. And these other craft did not seem to be the same configuration. They weren't as angular, didn't have a sharp edge, more rounded than the others. He took me out of this large hangar-like room, down a hallway, into another room where there were some other people who were dressed similar to him, except for the helmet. And so, right there, I thought, well, there's no excuse for them not to answer my questions. You know, I'm screaming, answering, you know, trying to get an answer. And they started leading me over to this table. And, you know, I'm starting to get sort of aggravated by the lack of response. I mean, suspicious, you know, why aren't they answering me, you know? I'm terrified. I want to know, you know, am I going to be okay? Is this, you know, am I still in a life-threatening situation? So when they started to try to get me to lay down on the table, I started to resist. And there was 3 of them, and they were very strong, and I was in a weakened condition. So it wasn't much of a fight. They got me onto the table. In my panic, I was able to jerk one hand free just long enough to get it underneath the edge of a mask that was placed over my face. But it was just for a very brief second, and then I lost consciousness. I didn't smell any particular odor. It was just, I just went out. And I have no idea how long I was unconscious, whether that was not too long before I found myself on the highway. Where this conscious period was it soon after I was hit by that energy in the woods? Or did it a number of days pass? I have no way of knowing where this conscious period was. It could have been sandwiched in between hours or days on either end. But whatever happened, the feeling of being mortally wounded was gone. Maybe just a little bit of unsteadiness. Got to my feet pretty quickly. Once this craft left, It shot up into the sky very quietly. It wasn't making the same sound the one in the woods did. But I recognized this stretch of road, the lights down below, as being outside of the town nearest where this happened. But the fear that I had been experiencing was rather recent, and it was fresh in my mind. And I ran down towards those lights as sort of like escaping from the fear behind me. Not that it was dark; it didn't seem, that the woods being a familiar environment, in spite of the fact that it was nighttime, didn't seem scary in that sense. The fact that I was on terra firma and familiar surroundings was very reassuring at that point. Ran across the first bridge into Heber, and there was a building there with lights on, steam or smoke or something coming out of the chimney. And so it was lit up pretty bright. And so I started pounding on the door and yelling, and nobody came. Either maybe nobody was there, or they thought somebody's really crazy out there and we better not go see who it is. But I ran on down, across the second bridge, came to a row of phone booths, and the first phone booth that I went into was out of order. And people wonder, how did you make a phone call, Well, in that part of the country at that time, you could just pick up the thing and get a dial tone, You could talk to an operator. And so it didn't work at all in the first one. In the middle one, I got a dial tone, made a collect call to my family, and this was my brother-in-law, Grant. And just an aside is found out later from a radio host up in the Great Lakes area that at that moment, I didn't know it at the time, this was 5 days after being taken, it was November 10th, was the date of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald on the Great Lakes. And this radio host was telling me that there had been jets scrambled in response to UFO reports at that time. And coincidentally, one of the crew members of the Edmund Fitzgerald was named Grant Walton. I was on the phone with my brother-in-law, Grant. It's just kind of a coincidence there. And then, of course, the disappearance of the entire crew on the boat. But my brother-in-law at first thought this was some kind of a prank. Apparently, there had been a lot of crank calls once this thing hit the worldwide news. The family had been getting various prank calls, and so he thought this was just another one to start hanging up on me. So I screamed and managed to convince him it was me, and he says, "Okay, I'll get your brother and come and get you." I didn't understand how he could get my brother, because my brother lived in Phoenix, which is 180 miles away. But I don't know what happened. I hung up, or whether I just collapsed at that point or passed out. But they found me in the bottom of the phone booth there, and took me out of there and put me in the truck. And somehow, in me trying to tell my brother what had happened, I just couldn't get it out. I couldn't finish a sentence. But somehow he got the idea that I didn't know how much time had gone by. He says, "Travis, feel your face." And I had this 5-day growth of beard. And so then I looked at my watch, and the date had changed, So it hit me at that point just how long and how much time had gone by, how much time I had lost. So that was quite a shock, and I just kind of gave up on trying to communicate. I was just in a state of total shell shock. We went back to Snowflake, had a very incredible reunion with my mother. And what my brother was most concerned with at that point was my condition. I was hanging by a thread, and the incredible madhouse. I mean, no one was taking the family's feelings into consideration at all. You know, they were saying and doing things to my mom in the condition she was in that, you know, gave no respect to how delicate her condition was. I guess they expected it all to be out where they can see it. You know, she's the kind of person who, you know, feels things inside. But my brother decided that the best thing for me was to get medical check very intensely, and that was not going to be possible in that community at that time because it was just a madhouse. So he headed out to Phoenix that night right then. Now, unbeknownst to us at the time, the operator had listened in on the phone call to the family and alerted the sheriff, you know, which was against the law, but in hindsight, you know, I'm glad that happened because the UFO skeptics had all kinds of scenarios and theories that had me being someplace else entirely. But the fact that phone call came from that phone booth and was reported to the sheriff to where they could send deputies over there that night proved and that I was there, and that totally disproved these other theories about where I was. But my brother had been contacted by members of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization during, UFO investigative groups about what should happen if I were found, you know, after such a traumatic experience. And these people said, contact us. So my brother took me to this doctor, Lester Stewart, who turned out to be a total phony. And so that became apparent after we arrived there that this was no medical doctor and he really couldn't help us. And so we left. But they had been boasting to the news media that they were the ones in charge of this important case. And so once they lost our cooperation, they started attacking and claiming the reason that we left is because we found out he was a drug expert. Well, he wasn't really a drug expert. He had a piece of paper from a diploma mill, a mail-order diploma, and it had only been in existence for 2 years, so he couldn't have had too much school. But that made it necessary once I was examined by real doctors who were part of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization to have blood and urine samples put through the county medical examiner's drug screen. Proved there was no trace of any drug in my body, but it was just all kinds of medical testing going on to, you know, assure that there was no, you know, dangerous, you know, threat to my survival. But there was a serious danger, threat to my sanity. I was hanging by a thread for weeks, and for some reason, you know, the demand that I immediately be polygraphed took precedence over my mental condition. But eventually, you know, I passed 5 different lie detector tests from 3 different examiners, all of whom had years of law enforcement experience. And, you know, the process immediately afterwards was of this bombardment of attacks trying to discredit me, discredit the crew, discredit the report. And, you know, to make a long story short, every single theory that was ever put forth was disproved, and much corroborating evidence was accumulated. My brother, it was an extremely stressful time for him, you know. He put himself out there in a way that was very detrimental to his own career. He was a horse trainer and horseshoer, and, you know, these are a lot of redneck kind of people who didn't appreciate the whole crazy alien story, and so it really hurt his business a lot. And he was standing between me and demands from the sheriff, and it mattered not to him. His concern was for my welfare, and I would not have survived those days without him. And he's no longer with us. I'm very grateful to him. This is L.J. Lorenzen. He was the head of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization at the time. And they had a lot of legitimate scientific people in their membership. You know, the doctors who examined me, Dr. Harder there on the left was the one who performed my regressive hypnosis. Dr. Leo Sprinkle there in the middle was the head of counseling and testing at the University of Wyoming, and he reviewed the psychiatric tests. That was another theory that, yeah, he passed a lie detector test because he believes this happened, but he's really crazy, you know. He had went temporarily insane and hallucinated the whole thing. But what the drug theory and the psychosis theory never took into consideration is how do 7 people have an identical hallucination? But in those days, anything to explain it away. And this bombardment of theories came primarily from one Philip Klass, a famous UFO debunker at the time, who I later found was under investigation by the FBI. This here is a copy of the memo from J. Edgar Hoover himself, director of the FBI, to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And there was quite a bit of material about this guy showing that the FBI took a very dim view of him. There's various quotations I took out of the file that his previous communications to the FBI have been accusatory or argumentative in nature. He's got no such sterling reputation as Dr. Hynek, who had expressed support of me and the crew. And here, the Newark FBI office is in possession of a letter Klass mailed to them. Suggests the reading of the letter indicates writer is most likely not in full possession of his faculties. So the FBI thought he was crazy. I mean, you know, I do too. But in view file, which is an abbreviation for FBI file, number blah 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 serial 7, in view of Klass's intemperate criticisms and often irrational statements he made to support them, it was recommended that the Bureau be most circumspect in any future contacts with him. But see, this was what was really curious. View files discloses that Klass has from time to time come to our attention by virtue of the fact that he has been in, and then they redacted 9 lines. Now what they're hiding from us there is pretty but this part at the end after that, and not to be of assistance to his government. So to me, that's the smoking gun in connection to the what do you call it? Recruitment by the CIA. to sort of direct his activities as a disinformation agent. And so that's you know, what's the word for it? You know, when after all is said and done, and he's done so much damage to have this kind of information come out about him, sort of sank so much of any argument he had once had. It was discovered that there was this phenomenal increase in the growth rate of the trees at the site. We went out there to do an interview on the site and discovered this. I didn't notice it, Mike did, and I found out later that he came back after the snows melted and took a core sample out of this tree and found out that here 15 years later, you can count back 15 years on the growth rings, that they were phenomenally thicker than they had been in the previous 85 years. So here's a 100-year-old tree that had basically doubled in size in 15 years, doubled in diameter. And at that time, he was taking care not to kill the tree, so he only took a sample from one side. But we later discovered, by taking a complete cross-section, that this effect of thickened tree rings was on the side of the tree towards where the craft had come down. And whether it was east, west, south, around the ring of the clearing, whatever side of the tree was towards where the UFO was the side where the thickened rings were. And Ben Hansen was supervising this expedition back to the site, and he looked into it further and did some online research and discovered that the pine trees in the vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear accident had experienced a similar jump in their growth rate. But because that radiation was diffuse, settling around on the trees, it wasn't one-sided like this, but it was determined that they were producing a wood fiber at 3 times the rate that they had prior to exposure to the radiation. It's not what you would expect. You find out, you would expect radiation to be something that would kill trees. And so there's a lot of ongoing research in connection with these growth rings and the calculations, and these samples have been sent to a lab. There's a kind of an analysis in particular with the actual nature of the growth. It's not normal growth. There was a map that I came across where the state of Arizona was divided into all these different areas, and I went to the area where the incident had happened, and it was given the designation Area 51, which I thought was kind of a funny coincidence, because we know Area 51 is in Nevada. And another coincidence was bringing my son, my oldest boy, with me. People said, "Oh, you brought D.B. Sweeney with you." And sure enough, I got to looking at the picture. D.B. Sweeney there on the left and my son on the right. There was a phenomenal similarity in their looks. But I'd like to take a little bit of time and get some question and answer in here, because you can't cover everything, and I'm sure there's certain things that you'd like to ask.
Were there any members at all of the story who actually failed polygraph tests?
At the time that the initial test was given, one guy, Alan Dallas, didn't complete his test. He got in an argument with the examiner and left. He later went back with the same examiner and took a test and passed with flying colors. And so I was also conned into doing a TV show with fake polygraph, in which they claimed that I was lying. But No person who ever was on that show ever passed. That was the deal. The examiner was his job was to fail everybody, and his work was critiqued by a number of organizations. There was actually an organization called World Polygraph that was formed prior to my ever being on the show, that were slamming the show as being absolutely such poor polygraph that there's no way you could determine anything by it. But my two best tests were after that TV show. But the top experts in the world have commented on all of the polygraph work involved here. People who have authored the textbooks on the matter. You know, Dr. David Raskin, University of Utah, Dr. Baxter, California, the state police polygraph expert, all of those people, and even the current American Polygraph Association head. Another question? Yeah.
Was it like in the movie when you were returned? You mentioned you were wearing a were you fully clothed, or was it like it wasn't?
No nudity. I was Hollywood again. No, I was fully clothed, but I certainly felt under the microscope, you know, with the media onslaught, you know.
Do you still have those clothes?
My brother was smart enough to say, take those, put them in a clean sack, we'll get these examined later. Put them in the trunk, and they wound up having stuff thrown in on top of it, and then this whole battle with all this other stuff. And so that was a valuable piece of evidence that wound up getting contaminated. Yeah.
That's which most people don't say. Yes. Question.
Did you have any physical damage?
Yes.
Was there any physical damage, anything evident in regard to me?
Yeah, you said your chest was...
Other, you know, I did have upper body x-rays. There was no broken bones or anything visible. The EEG had an anomalous wave pattern, and I still have that report. But as far as there being any lingering and negative effects, it was not that at all. And, you know, I you know, sort of was reluctant to even talk about the positive effects that became evident after a while until I could document them. I waited until I went into my employers and got the printout on my attendance to prove that I never called in sick in 40 years before I would talk about it, you know, because, you know, the whole reason I'm doing this is because I want to establish the credibility of this phenomenon. There's a lot of strange things that happen in connection with this that I can't document, so I don't talk about those aspects because they don't add to credibility, they can take away from it. So I can document that, so I can tell you about that. Whether that proves conclusively that I didn't call in sick because of what happened to me there, it could be unrelated. Maybe it's because I live healthy.
Yeah, hi. So was there ever a clear message that was given to you at all, or was it just that staring and that uneasy feeling that you were left with, and then you're going to figure it all out on your own?
Once I started doing a lot more interviews again, there was a number of years by the time I was persuaded to do the movie. And at that point, I was started to have dreams again, but not so much these small creatures, not so much that fear, but these human-looking ones, and little glimmers of stuff came through there. And I went to Tracy Torme, he was the screenwriter for Paramount at that time, and asked him, I said, do you think that this could, you know, be memories coming back, you know? Or do you think maybe it's just I'm thinking about this more because of doing all these interviews because of the movie coming out? And he says, oh, it's probably just because you're talking about it. But then I asked him the same question recently, and he goes, oh, no, that's probably memories coming back. So hard to say. I think there was a period of time with some blocked memories. And during the hypnosis, Dr. Harder did establish that there was memories that it was too dangerous to try to penetrate.
You You answered my question.
At this point, we're pushing the limit of the building. Travis will be at his table for a little while to speak to people, and books are there and things like that. So at this point, a great hand for Travis Walton.